So there's one of those bird's eye maps, 1876 of Ottawa. You can see it's not going any further than this. This would, as we'll see, will become the experimental farm. Lansdowne is right down there. But the thing I want you to notice, there's the Parliament buildings. You can see the steamships going on their way to Montreal daily. Please bring that back. Lower Town a lot more built up than Upper Town. As I told you, the class system is in operation as well. This is lower class Ottawa. This is upper class Ottawa. But the thing I want you to notice is this. These are stacks of timber. These are stacks of timber. Because by 1876, Ottawa has transformed itself into a major, major lumber town. Even Philemon Wright, when he first got here, as I told you, Philemon Wright sent the first lumber raft in 1800 down to Quebec City. And Philemon Wright is the first guy to chop down trees. But he realized that at some point in the future, this was going to become a major, major lumber town. And certainly, in fact, the conglomeration that is down, was down, Scott's about the only one remaining, Scott Paper's about the only one remaining down there. It was the biggest sawmill conglomeration in the world. In the world. At one point they decided that for 20 hours straight, all of the mills would saw and plane. And they wanted to see how much board feet they could produce in 20 hours. If one end is by my foot, if they were laid end to end, the other end would be in Hyde Park in London. That's how much timber was coming out of here. Amazing. I had the opportunity to look at the death records at Beechwood Cemetery. A very interesting afternoon. There's books, roll calls of the dead, and I kept coming across drowned in sawdust. People would step into the river, and it would look like it was land, and it's like quicksand sawdust if it's that deep, and it would go in. Also toothache, died of toothache, and also kicked by horse. Yeah. But I want to have a look now at that lumber growth. There's the Parliament buildings. Here's one of the rafts going down. There's the end of the Rideau Canal. That's the Bytown Museum. And here is the steamship station, the wharf. Is that building right there. As I explained to you last time, R.W. Scott had gone down around Lac Champlain and had invited up a bunch of lumber barons and told them that the waterfront lots, 39, 38, 37, were available for at auction, but there would be no opposing bids. So now you've got people coming up like Thompson, Purley, and E.B. Eddy. E.B. Eddy is an interesting character. He's from Vermont. He comes up on the far side, on the north side of the river. He's able to set up his mills. There's his mills there. A lot of these guys turn up. For instance, Eddy turned up with maybe about $20 in his pocket. But he had already, down in Vermont, him and his wife were a kitchen table industry. They made matches. And when he came up here, he did the same thing. He was using the spare lumber. He would go round the other sawmills and collect timber, usually from the shingle makers. And him and his wife sat on Eddy Street, when the small house they had on Eddy Street, and actually sat and made, at the kitchen table, made matches. All right? That's in the 1850s. By the 1870s, he's a millionaire. He's gone into also making pails, tubs, washboards, and clothespins, and all those things that used to be made out of wood, and still should. And he goes on to establish a mill. He buys land, becomes the mayor of Hull several times, and gets burned out at least twice, and actually died in debt. He was never able to, he would recover each time, but he got burned out. And he was one of those unfortunate gentlemen like myself who said, I don't need insurance. And it took him several years to get himself back up again, but he died a millionaire. And of course now we have one of my favorite streets, actually, Eddy Street over in Hull. I like it. It feels like the Ottawa I grew up in the 50s. It feels like that, yeah. That's Bronson's house, Frederick Bronson. That's his house. In the background, you can see what look like high-rises. They're stacks of lumber. Where is this? This is next to the Juliana Apartments, Ottawa's first luxury apartments. Do you know what I'm talking about? The little promontory. Right if you carry on Bronson North until you basically have to stop and turn to go past Christchurch. There's a little park there, and then you're up on a promontory. And so this is where Bronson's house was. And all of the lumber barons had these great big houses. I suppose they're the high-tech or the dot-com millionaires of their time, you know, resource exploitation as opposed to digital information. But these guys pretty well ran the city. For instance, that's J.R. Booth. He's a street, of course. I just drove past his house, which was for a while the Laurentian Club. So you're coming, here's O'Connor, and then, forgive me, Metcalf. There's Metcalf, and I'm going west on, say, McLaren, and then you'll notice this big, it was also where the University Women of Canada used to have their headquarters as well in there. I spoke there a few times. But that was Booth's big house. There's still Booths kicking around. One of them recently died. He was in his 80s. He was also a J.R. Booth, and of course there's that old thing about it takes one generation to make the million, and it takes 2 generations to lose it, right? But he's still a fair bit of money kicking around. He's not an American. The Canadian, the Ottawa lumber business is basically started by these Americans that are brought up, Pearlie Thompson, Patty, that I mentioned. But he's from the Eastern Townships. He comes up and he starts working for Wright, as many of them do, and then branches out on his own and becomes by far probably the richest man we've ever seen in Ottawa. He starts railways, the Canadian Atlantic Railway. He's got a fleet of Great Lake transport ships. He lives until 1925 when he's in his 90s. On his 90th birthday, he actually threw out the puck at a hockey game. He needed assistance to get to the middle and back, but he actually did it. These are his two sons, Jackson, Lawrence. The Booth building is the one, the older building. It's called the Transport House, and it's stuck on the corner of the Rideau Center. It's the old building. Do you know what I'm talking about now? It's next to the Senate X train station. There's an old building. That's the Booth building. And then the Jackson building is further down. It's just past the Ottawa Public Library. It's been much renovated, but it's named after this one, Jackson. So he's a builder. A lot of the money that he donates goes to a purchase of the land of the experimental farms. But I think if you remember, right at the beginning I said, because of the Chaudière Falls, sooner or later there's going to be industry here. That's the Canadian model. Well, he harnessed the Chaudière like nobody else. His land holdings up the Ottawa Valley for timber were the size of France. The size of France. They're just enormous. Quite actually a shy man. He's one of those employers. So I'm busy working at the sawmill. I'm working at the sawmill, and all of a sudden I notice that standing next to me is Mr. Booth with his sleeves rolled up, and he sort of works for 15 minutes with you. You know, how's it going and all this sort of stuff. When they went on strike, the lumbermen down there, he actually supplied them with a wage well ahead of any unionization. He supplied them with a wage. He kept his workers. Right, but he would stand there and he'd work alongside for 15 minutes, and of course you can imagine the reaction as he for 15 minutes and walks away. So the employee would sort of like, bosses that work alongside you, give me a break. But there's a lovely story with Jackson. Later in life, he walked everywhere. But later in life, his legs were starting to go, and he actually required to borrow his son's car and chauffeur. And at the end of the day, he gets out of the car, and the chauffeur does this. If you can see my hand, he's looking for a drop. So J.R. says, John Rodolphus says, what's this all about? And he says, well, Mr. Lawrence usually gives me a tip at the end of the day. And so he says, J.R. says, well, get the money off him. He's got a rich father. I don't. Mackenzie King, when he died in 1925, by then Mackenzie King is on one of his first runs as Prime Minister, called him the father of Canada. But in the things have slowly evolved in that he's a colonizer, but he's also, in some senses, a robber baron. Hence the song that I sang at the beginning. But the biggest funeral that Ottawa had ever seen when this man died, he was a horticulturist, but asked that there be no flowers at his funeral. And as it proceeded down Wellington, there were 4 or 5 floats absolutely full of flowers for him. Let's have a look at just quickly, in 1881, the population hits 25,000 in Ottawa. It hits 25,000. And in 1885, electricity comes to Ottawa. There's a contract that goes out, and the Ottawa Electric Light Company installs 165 arc lamps at a cost of $78 a lamp, which is pretty expensive. But it ran basically from Parliament down to Rideau Hall. So there's a connection there, because they also want to put in a telephone in there. There's Booth's Mills. This is a smokehouse, basically, for burning off the sawdust. You might remember the E.B. Eddy chimney, which was there not too long ago. Remember the big chimney that was, yeah, only recently, maybe what, 10 years ago? I'm at the age where I can't quite remember when things happened. Except Ottawa history, of course. The railways, of course, in advanced. As I said, Booth started the Canadian Atlantic, which came over the bridge by Lemieux Island, which was a railway one, the one that's now closed off. But they're thinking of reopening it, thank goodness, and turning it into a trail. But the train would come over, and it would also run down the side of Majors Hill Park. There was a line there over the Alexandra Bridge, and you can see that it was a railway bridge. You know that one where you drive on your car and you go, there's a weird, yeah. So this is the Broad Street station. It's down on the Breton Flats. It's actually the second incarnation of it. You might recognize the style. Anybody who's been to Windsor or to Quebec City, the chateau style that later that CPR had, the chateau style, which of course turns into the Chateau Laurier and etc. But just take note, we're about to get to it, of this streetcar here, but there's still people turning up and being dropped off in a horse and carriage. The rail yards are down there. By the time this picture is taken, the train has gone right across Canada. So you can leave Vancouver and you would end up if you ended up in Ottawa, you would end up disembarking at this station. And instead of close to 30 or 40 days to get from one to, they've got it down to about 13 days. And then rapidly down to 6 days to come right across the country and from Vancouver and into Ottawa. Also around this, we can't see it, there's coal yards and there are train repair stations, and the mechanics that work there end up in Mechanicsville. That's why it's called Mechanicsville. It's the railway mechanics that would stay there. As we'll see next week, of course, it gets replaced by the Union Station down opposite the Chateau Laurier, the one that's now the Senate. And anytime they want to give us it back, I would really appreciate it. What a concert hall that would make. Oh my goodness. So this eventually, when falls into disrepair, kind of like the Russell House, and comes down. But as a train station, I think it's quite a lovely one. Yeah. That's the experimental farm. That's the experimental farm. John Carling, who's the Minister of Agriculture in 1888, decides that Canada at that point, in 1900, 90% of Canadians were involved in some sort connected to agriculture or in some way rural life. By 2000, it had flipped. Only 10% of Canadians now are involved in agriculture. But then it's 90, and of course, a lot of them are farmers coming over from Europe, the sheepskin farmers in the prairies, etc. And Canada sort of gets divided up into potatoes, fruit, I'm going east-west, wheat, and then fruit again in the Okanagan. So there's sorry, that's a kind of rough model, but that's kind of how it gets divided up. So it's decided by John Carling that there should be a series of experimental farms in which these people who are from Europe learn how to farm in Canada, using Canadian soils, the different soil zones, etc. So they acquire close to 400 acres on the edge of town, and they appoint an etymologist, William Sanders, to be the very first director of the experimental farm. That's his house. Goes with the job, and it's now gone. But we have managed to hang on to, for now, the experimental farm. The experimental farm. I cannot think of another city in the world that has a farm that it's not 400 acres anymore, but it's close to 300 acres, that is now in the heart of the city. I mean, I presume everybody's been, yes? Yeah. I mean, it's. I remember going down there with my partners. She was 6, little Kyo, going down there, and me pointing to the back of a cow and saying, "You know, you like rump steak?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, that's where it comes from." Ew. I'm eating cow's bum. Yes, you are. But I mean, generations and generations of Ottawa kids realizing that that's where food comes from. A lot of experimentation, particularly genetic, crossbreeding of wheats, etc., that are suitable for durum, etc., for growing in the durum is first, the strains that we use now in the prairies, the durum wheat, first produced down here at the experimental farm. Yes?
What's in the right corner up there? Is it a bridge? Right corner?
There?
No.
Oh, up here?
Yeah.
No, it's just farmland. Farmland, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. This is 1888. The ability of a city to grow is based on its ability to feed itself. So the model then was that you would have a city and it would be surrounded by farms, and the farms would feed the city. It isn't until 1910 when the refrigerated ship has been invented, and it comes into Montreal in 1910, 2 of them, and they're laden with food from the UK and from various places, and then the city can grow to whatever size it needs to, because now you can feed it not with your own surrounding farms, right? So you can end up with Mexico City. How the hell do they feed 30 million people a day? It's refrigeration that makes that possible. A city can only grow, I'm sure people here will remember, particularly the gentleman in the back that's now in his 80s and was born and was raised here, will remember that on the Byward Market you could still get chickens and rabbits, and all of it was local food, you know. And they've tried to hold on to that, but it's slowly disappearing. But so there was a series of experimental farms across Canada, but this was the headquarters. Every major architect, Hewitt, etc., build the architecture down there is if you even just do, yes?
I'm just wondering, is the Arboretum also 1888?
No, it comes only a little bit later in the design. I couldn't date it exactly. Of course, the Wildflower Garden is fairly recent.
Yes.
Yeah, but the Arboretum is always part of the original plan. I think it's in by the turn of the century for sure. Yeah. Again, to be able to walk within, you know, you can see almost the Parliament buildings, and yet here you are in this beautiful manicured forest. You know, it's our Versailles, this place. Actually, the name of the design for it was picturesque with capital P. It was designed to be picturesque, and then of course they put in the observatory as well, which is now a storage unit. But originally the time came from there, from do you know the observatory I'm talking about? Yeah, the telescope was there, and our time signal came from there. Did you miss an episode? Then go to rogerstv.com and watch The History of Ottawa, according to Phil Jenkins, online anytime. Thanks for watching.